Welcome everyone to the Venture Portland and PBOT Healthy Business Permit Q&A. My name's Calvin Hoff. I work for Venture Portland. And on the panel today, we have Nick Falbo of PBOT, as well as Bridget Coleman from PBOT. They're going to be doing the presentation right off the top here. A couple housekeeping items before we get started. We do ask that you stay muted during the meeting so everyone can hear the presenters clearly. Sometimes if people leave their mics on when they're not speaking, the mics will pick up background noise, and that makes it pretty hard for other people in the meeting to hear what's going on. And then in the recording afterwards, it makes it difficult for some people to hear what others are saying. So please be conscious of that. I do strongly encourage you to use the chat function in Zoom to ask questions. As the presentation is going on, we're going to be compiling those questions, and we're going to make sure that they're either asked in the Q&A section of the meeting, or that if we don't have the answer to it, we follow up with you with an answer relevant to your question. And so with that, I'm going to hand over the platform to Nick, who will kick us off here.
Thanks, Calvin. Hi, everybody. My name is Nick Falbo. I'm with the Portland Bureau of Transportation and their planning group, doing some work to help the Bureau respond to the COVID-19 crisis. And that is a variety of programs. I'm going to not get into all the detail there. We're going to focus mostly on the business stuff, but definitely encourage you to look into what we're working on if you're interested in learning more about how we're trying to support people during this time. So let me share my screen. All right, so the program we have right now to respond to COVID-19 is called Safe Streets, and it's a collection of different programs to adapt Portland streets for restarting public life. We want to make sure that people can return to their lives as the stay-at-home order ends and we start to reopen. And this is not just, this includes mobility. How do you travel through your neighborhood? How do you stay safe walking on skinny sidewalks? How do we do business and help customers feel safe as they start to return back to our main streets and back to our small businesses. The plan itself, you can learn more at our website, safestreetspdx.com. There's a draft report available. There's more information about these different programs, and we welcome feedback. We welcome your ideas. We're trying to think creatively about how we can use our streets. One of those programs specifically geared towards businesses is called Healthy Businesses. And it's a toolkit that lets us rethink kind of how we use our streets to adapt quickly and let businesses sort of spill into the streets that are near them so that they can do more business and do so in a way that's keeping their customers, their employees safe and building a lot of confidence in customers that are maybe hesitant to be coming back to businesses at this time. So I'm gonna hand the mic over to Bridget Coleman in the permitting group, who can talk more about the specifics of this program.
Better unmute myself first, I suppose. So yeah, as Nick was mentioning, this Healthy Business program is directly in response to the emergency situation of COVID-19. And we recognize that businesses are being pretty heavily impacted by COVID, and that in addition to that, we see that a lot of Black, Indigenous, person of color owned businesses are being disproportionately impacted. So we'll talk a little bit about what we're doing for those folks as well. Nick, if you don't mind progressing, thank you. So our business toolkit is allowing us to provide permits for businesses to operate in the right-of-way, basically extending their store footprint into sidewalk, parking, street spaces. Street space makes up 20% of the city, and so we see that as a valuable asset in allowing for physical distancing and keeping customers and the people who work for you safe. Next slide. So one of the first things that we launched was our Healthy Businesses 5-minute pickup and drop-off zones. These are free. There's a simple request form that you can fill out online through our website. It's usually one per block unless there's a high demand need or we're looking for areas where maybe businesses are using a larger segment of right-of-way and they'd like to have additional pickup drop-off zones designated so folks can get in and out quickly for their pickup needs. Basically, we email the signs to you, you put them up, and you're good to go. Next slide. So the healthy businesses permits come in a variety of options. The first and maybe least complex of those is the parking plaza, which is shown here. And that is use of the parking spaces for line queuing, for pickup, drop off, load, unload needs, dining, or other activities that businesses may require. Next. So ramping up from there in complexity, we have some parking use shown here, but also a side street plaza that includes the travel lane. So that's allowing traffic to keep flowing, but it's utilizing a portion of the street for business use. I will note that in this, there is dining tables shown, but this could be used for other services, haircuts, maybe fitness, exercises, things along those lines as well. Next, please. Here you see the full side street plaza. So that's closing a portion of that side street for business use, and as well as some parking space use with book racks or sales shelves shown down the street. These side street plazas are great in situations where you have multiple businesses that are looking for maybe a larger space that they can share, or a single business that needs additional space, and we kind of look at those on a case-by-case basis. We really are encouraging businesses to work together, so talk to your neighbors, talk about your business needs, see how you can collaborate to come up with a solution that's going to work for everybody. And then the last, most complex of these options is our Main Street Plaza concept, and that is shown here as a full street closure that's allowing for retail, services, dining in the right of way, and still maintaining that safe pedestrian access through the space. I will say some of these Main Street closures can also be half of the street. Maybe it's just parking in a lane on one side of the road. So there's lots of options. We just wanted to give you some inspiration, some ideas to think about of how you could potentially do a closure that serves many of the businesses in your neighborhood. So healthy business permits are free. This is kind of unusual for the city. Normally we do have fees associated with use of the right-of-way, but because this is in response to our emergency situation with COVID, they are free and they'll be valid until November 1st of 2020. Again, collaborative solutions are great. Talking to your neighbors, working with them, knowing what their business needs are, and finding options that work well for everybody is what we like to see happening. We do review these on a case-by-case basis. If you're hoping to get something on the ground quickly, we often recommend that you start with a parking concept. Let us know that you're looking at a collaborative solution with neighbors or a bigger closure, but the parking is pretty easy to get going quickly. So if you know, yes, I'd love to use some parking spaces and then ramp up to a larger closure concept, we can work with you to accommodate that as well. And then of course, businesses are going to need to meet all of the state and county guidelines to make sure that we're keeping everybody safe. A couple other things I want to note about the program. Many of you may have seen that we released some information about sidewalk cafes. So anyone who is a 2020 sidewalk cafe permit holder can email or call us, and we will automatically enroll you in our Healthy Businesses program. And you will just be asked to comply with, again, the state and county guidelines for physical distancing and cleanliness. We also have a new map that is available. So if you're wondering, how do I find out where these projects are happening? There's a map on our website. I'll share a link in the chat here in a minute when we're done presenting. And also for street closure projects, we ask that the businesses that are applying for those are notifying their adjacent properties with a flyer, and that'll have their contact info and PBOTs as well. We do have some resources. I talked about Black, Indigenous, and person of color owned businesses. We have some resources available that are PBOTs, as well as some things that are being donated by other organizations. So we are prioritizing BIPOC owned businesses for those resources. Some of those include design services. So we have a number of architecture firms, design firms, and contractors who are working with us through Portland State University to provide design and build services for these installations. And they'll work directly with communities to talk about what their needs are and work through the design process with them. We also have traffic control devices, a limited supply of those, but we're trying to grow that supply and make those available for business owners. We also have paint. So we have a partnership with Miller Paint. They're providing 30% off all of their paint for projects that are being permitted through the Healthy Business programs. In addition to that, BIPOC-owned businesses can receive up to 3 gallons of free paint. So that is something that you can connect with us on. And we're starting to secure additional resources every day. So I will say that list is kind of fluid and changing. I know we're having discussions with a couple folks about furniture and other resources. We also have a new sign up to donate resources via our website. So if you're a business that says, I have resources or I want to contribute and help get these projects off the ground, you can sign up through the website and let us know what you have available. If you would like to prioritize Black, Indigenous, and person of color owned businesses, and we'll work with you to make those available to folks. I think that about covers all of the information. We really want to focus on some Q&A, but Nick's going to go through a couple slides that show some visual demonstrations from other areas, just to give you a little more inspiration and talk about what that might look like.
Thanks, Bridget. Yeah, you know, the vision of what these can be in many ways is up to you as the applicant, up to you as an organizing neighborhood to bring as many resources as you can. As Bridget said, we have some resources as the city to help make these happen in certain locations, but it's kind of like, you know, we're trying to be very flexible and very open, but these are implemented. Both the application is submitted by businesses and they're implemented by businesses. This is not a PBOT project, but we want to inspire you to make you think about what might be possible. So here are some examples of locations in other cities that are doing similar things. This is this type of initiative is happening in cities all around the country. If you have got a limited space, maybe a parking lane, you might be able to create a nice little mini parking plaza using paint, using furniture to really define the space separate from the roadway. If you've got a series of businesses all along a main street, you might think about just taking over the parking lane to create a real promenade of tables and seating and other activities in the parking lane. And then you think about if you can do these bigger side street plazas or main street plazas, something that really takes over that space and creates a new space just for the summer with paint and planters and seating to really create a place that people can feel comfortable in outside. And then, you know, obviously too many people for physical distancing guidelines, but the idea that you can really create a place here. It doesn't have to just be a bunch of tables in the street. It can be something that you create that really has a lot of kind of a lasting placemaking impact to create a wonderful area on or near your main street. I think with that, we're gonna go to Q&A, and we hope to answer questions that you may have and point you to additional resources if you're interested in participating in this permit program.
So Nick and Bridget, we got a couple questions here in the chat that I'm hoping you guys can address. You guys did mention that there's a map that you're gonna have available where healthy business permits have been issued. So we'll be sharing that out if people are wondering where these are going on. We got a specific question about Nob Hill. It's my understanding that you guys are delegating certain PBOT staff for certain areas. So maybe we can follow up after this meeting with specifically Nob Hill to make sure that they know where they stand exactly in the process. And then, you know, one of the other questions we had was, what are some of the factors that would keep someone from being able to do one of these projects? Like, what are you guys considering when you decide, is this street appropriate for this kind of project?
It's a great question. Sorry.
No, go for it, Nick.
Not every street is a good candidate for a plaza, as you can imagine. You know, our streets are part of a complex system that serves multiple different competing needs. And so some are going to be easier than others. When we look at street plazas, we're looking at things like transit service. Is there existing transit service on your street? And are there alternatives for that? Can that be rerouted? That's something that takes cooperation and coordination with TriMet, so it's not going to happen very quickly, but it is something that is on the table on certain corridors. Freight routes and important traffic routes, those are also going to be challenging to figure out, well, how are we going to accommodate that traffic and access needs that it serves today. Similarly, emergency response routes can also limit what might be possible on certain streets. So you'll find is that a lot of our traditional main streets are on traffic routes that are transit oriented and have emergency response needs. So that's not to say it can't be done. I know that there's some really exciting conversations on the Alberta corridor about doing plazas on that street because they could easily kind of reroute the bus, for example, onto Killingsworth. So there are possibilities out there. So just a little bit of caution, like you can imagine a lot, but not everything is possible. But we do want to work with you to scale that back. Maybe you can't do something on the main street itself, but what you can do is go around the corner and do something on the side street or do something in the parking lane. So we want you to think as big as you can, but it really will, I want to stress, it really will take neighborhood-led coordination and collaboration. If you are excited by these plaza opportunities, the only way we're going to be able to move the mountains that are transit routes and other needs on our streets is if there's a real strong support coming from the neighborhoods and the business districts that are representing these corridors.
Mm-hmm. And I'll add for like the individual business, because you can apply as an individual business or you can do a collaborative project and kind of scale up into that bigger space use. We have had a couple individual businesses who have applied who don't have parking on any adjacent side of their building, and the streets that they are on are transit routes. So there's some unique kind of situations where there isn't an easy solution. And we also are encouraging folks to look at private property space that may be near them to use as well. That's kind of out of our realm, but another option that some neighborhoods and areas are looking at. And then we are flexible. There's a lot of kind of leeway in, well, if I'm parking across the street and the business across the street is happy to have my sidewalk dining seating out there or my yoga class happen, you know, can I use that space instead? So there is flexibility in there. And we do review all of these individually. So we'll be putting them through our criteria and giving applicants some feedback on some of the challenges that they may be looking at, as well as some solutions that we think might work for their unique situation.
Thanks, Bridget. We have a couple questions here regarding just resources and I guess physical materials that a business might need for a project like this. You know, something barricades, tables, chairs. You know, is there a place that you guys have where people can go to maybe either connect to these resources or see what PBOT can cover? And then to follow up on that too, you know, how are you kind of managing this program given the context of we're in the middle of COVID-19 and every business is suffering one way or another? And, you know, how are you trying to manage the level of investment financially a business is going to need to have in order to just get back out on the street and be operational?
Yeah, I think every business's unique needs are going to be different from what they would need to invest to operate in the space. Some folks already have things in their shop that they can move out into the street space and utilize. PBOT has limited resources available, and we realize that Black, Indigenous, and person of color owned businesses are being disproportionately affected by COVID-19. So yes, it's bad for everyone, but we are really focusing the resources that we have there first. So that is our priority. And as far as traffic barricades, we have a list of rental companies. It's not completely inclusive, but we have some that we know of that people have made us aware of on the website. If you know of others, please share them with us and we'll make sure we get them added to the list, but we can add a link in the chat to that as well.
Great. You know, we also had a few questions here about, you know, either weekend applications or people who want to use this for some kind of reoccurring thing that doesn't necessarily happen 7 days a week. So for example, we have someone from Old Town who's asking about doing maybe a series of Saturday closures. Someone else is asking about weekends only. Can you speak to that and how that might interact with this process?
Yeah, so weekend closures, kind of pop-up closures or community events is what we would normally call them. All of those permits are on hold because they don't, we're not in a phased re-entry that allows for that level of participation. And I think that we're really trying to stay away from event style activities that are drawing large crowds for just a day or a weekend, and really more using the right-of-way space for day-to-day operations of businesses.
Okay. And then can you speak a little bit to the insurance requirements for a program like this? What is a business going to need to look at and get? And will all the businesses using the street need to follow that same process?
Yeah, insurance is required, but there's a lot of different ways that that can work. So for individual businesses, we ask and require that there's a certificate and endorsement that are on file with the city of Portland, naming us as additionally insured, and we have some information about that on the website as well. And then for these larger plaza closures, it's going to be dependent on what the circumstances are with the businesses in the neighborhood. So it's possible that a business association or a neighborhood association would potentially cover the insurance. That's something that applicants and communities can explore with those folks, or that the businesses could each bring insurance to the table in one fashion or another to cover the space that's going to be utilized.
So if my business is just, say, on a block that is being closed, but my business isn't necessarily going to be out there doing business, I don't need to get the appropriate insurance then, correct?
No, the closure area will be covered by the businesses that are getting the permit. Okay.
I'm hoping you guys can maybe elaborate a little bit on the changes to the sidewalk cafe and dining program. We had some questions about, do businesses need to initiate that with the city? And if so, then, are they going to be punished if they just didn't hear about this? Will you guys be proactively reaching out to all the permit holders? And then we had a specific question here about, a street like Foster Road where they have very wide sidewalks that, allow for 6-foot distancing, even with some sidewalk seating. Are those businesses also going to have to, change their sidewalk dining program despite them still having that 6-foot distance requirement?
So the Sidewalk Cafe permit holders, anyone who was a 2020 permit holder received a couple of emails because there was some confusion about the first one. We had a follow-up email. They can email or call us and just say, yes, I'd like a healthy business permit for my existing Sidewalk Cafe. And then they are just asked that they comply with the physical distancing requirements and other requirements from the state and county. So that is automatic. We'll send a new permit and they'll be good to go. Folks that were not existing permit holders but are looking to use the sidewalk, we do have limited sidewalks in the city that allow folks to meet those physical distancing requirements, but they do exist, and absolutely businesses can apply for those permits. And we'll put them through our normal healthy business review process and issue the permits that way. And I think there was a question of, if you're doing just a sidewalk, is it only a sidewalk, or can I do sidewalk and parking? The answer is you can do multiple applications or multiple things within your closure. So you could have sidewalk, if you're a Sidewalk Cafe holder, or if you're looking for that, you could have sidewalk seating as well as parking, or sidewalk seating and a partial lane project with your neighboring businesses. It can be scaled up and down depending on business needs and neighborhood needs.
Great. I do know some districts in the city have upcoming construction projects. And so I'm wondering, are you guys proactively working with those projects to make sure that, businesses can get outdoors and still operate, even with those things on the docket? And then, as an addendum to that, some people have streets where, there are still significant potholes and things that have yet to be repaired. Would you guys be able to be proactive in getting those filled so that people could get out there and do business without the risk of people tripping, falling, things like that?
So as far as construction that is happening, there are ongoing conversations about, I guess, the overlap of those projects with this business permit that's available through November 1st. So those conversations are happening, and we're coordinating internally to figure out how that's going to work, what those parameters are going to look like. From a pothole filling perspective, our maintenance operations crew has a schedule in place, and they're working very actively to meet their deadlines. I'm not certain that we'll be able to offer fixing potholes prior to business use of those spaces, just because they are very, very busy people. We have lots of potholes in the city. So I'm not going to make any promises there, but perhaps we can have a chat with them and see if that's even a possibility.
Okay, thank you, Bridget. We had a question about some of the street painting elements that you guys alluded to. What does that look like? How do businesses go about it? And how does it dovetail with this program? And then we also did have a question about the map where you guys had issued permits. So maybe just following this, Nick or Bridget, you can do a screen share and just do some wayfinding as to how to read that map.
Nick, you want to set up mapping and I'll talk a little bit about street painting? Awesome. So our street painting, our normal street painting program, you may have seen some of the intersection murals that have been done, is on hold. But we are allowing street paintings through our Healthy Business Permit program. And the normal street painting program should open up once Multnomah County moves into phase 2. I believe that's our plan right now. But businesses can paint the street. You may have noticed in some of the slides that Nick shared that the applications where they had tables and furniture and shelving out in the right-of-way, they had also painted the street with kind of colorful decorative designs to add that extra visual element to the space and really kind of separate it from the street space. So that's something that is available for folks. I will flag that business logos or advertising are not allowed in the space. So you couldn't put just your business logo on the street in front of your business, but you can do some cool colors and design to kind of make it visually appealing and more inviting for folks that are coming into the space. And no, I don't believe we'll remove paint in November. It removes itself. It usually has a 2 to 3 year lifespan. The companies or the communities that are doing street paintings, they usually go out every summer and repaint their streets to keep them vibrant, but they do eventually wash away.
And then there's a question about the map. This is a map on our website. It's sort of a living document. I'm going to share my screen. What I'm sharing here is the Safe Streets Initiative website. You get to that, Safe Streets PDX. And it's got a variety of information, including applications for healthy business permits, other information about Safe Streets programs. But here's a map here, map of permits and other initiatives related to slow streets. So this is a combination map that includes multiple programs. And as our Safe Streets initiative rolls out with more additional programs, they'll be added to this map. So more things will pop up. What you can see here as we zoom out into the city, close this. There are these green lines and dots have to do with our neighborhood greenway network. One of our Safe Streets Initiative programs has to do with creating and reinforcing the low traffic, slow speed neighborhood greenway system to give people more space to move and room to breathe as they get around their neighborhoods. And then these other dots have to do with the different types of healthy businesses permitting. So if you click on this legend icon, it'll expand and let you read in more detail what the different legend items are. So different colored dots refers to different scales and types of installations. So we have here, these blue dots are quick 5-minute pickup and drop off. These purple dots are parking plazas, so just in the parking lane. Those are the first things that could be permitted more easily. They've got fewer conflicts and design issues to work through. And then we've got some of these street plazas as well. Here's a street plaza proposed on a side street off of Standy. So there's some examples of where these are. You can take a look, see whether they're happening. These don't mean that there's anything on the ground quite yet, but that these have been approved so that when we're open tomorrow, that these spaces can be used for business purposes.
I'm going to circle back around on paint. It looks like there were a couple other questions about that. And somebody was talking about the traffic being confusing for TrafficScape. First, I'll say that things are very fluid. So the program is changing, kind of rapidly. Our previous painting programs, we just leave them on the street. If it is a main street, we haven't done one yet, but I'm thinking that's something that we'll be talking about internally. Does the streetscape need to be returned to its normal condition, pressure washed or whatever that means? So maybe there will be some more information coming about that. Thank you for the question and for flagging that for us.
We do have a couple questions here about OLCC, and how that interacts with insurance. And then, just in general, if I'm a bar and I want to do some outdoor serving of cocktails and drinks, what kind of special procedures do I need to go through to make sure that I'm following everything correctly?
Yeah, so the OLCC has an application process as well, and I believe I'm not 100% certain what their process is, but I think they're requesting a site plan and location information. But they also have kind of adapted for emergency response, and they're being pretty flexible in where they're allowing folks to serve. So a lot of things like being in parking or, maybe across the sidewalk or something they're being very flexible on that. So all you have to do is fill out their request form through their website. They'll review your information and get back to you.
Could you also talk a little bit about how you guys are working with some other city bureaus? So I'm thinking, we had an immediate reference in the chat here to the Parks Bureau, and maybe, using some of that space as a community gathering point, or, just to do outdoor commerce. And then also relevant to our outer East Portland districts, how are you working with other bureaus to make sure that people can, go out into their parking lot and do safe outdoor commerce? What's the interactions look like between bureaus in the city?
I mean, Nick, I'm just going to keep talking.
I'll jump in and give you a break. Some of this, you're right, it's different bureaus, so different leadership, different policies and practices. We can't speak for the Parks Bureau. It's their property. They manage it the way that they do. As far as moving business activity into the parks, I'm not sure that that's something that they're particularly interested in being a part of. But the space we do have, our streets, is what we are offering up. Out in East Portland and other more auto-oriented areas where not only is the street context maybe less friendly for using the street for these activities, but there are other resources like your parking lot. We have been working with BPS and BDS about what their requirements are when it comes to moving into your parking lot. And I think we've got a draft set of guidelines that I don't think they're quite ready to share yet, but we will be distributing them as soon as we can. That kind of looks at what are those different regulatory hurdles. And in general, you can. We don't have a lot of strict parking requirements in the city of Portland, so using your parking lot for business serving purposes is generally allowed and doesn't run you afoul of any other requirements. There are rules about signs and marketing. There are going to be rules about how do you preserve accessible parking and other things that might limit what your options are. But we want to encourage you to do that. That isn't something that PBOT really issues permits for or has much of a role in, but we are thinking that some of our design resources, we can help you, especially if you're a BIPOC-owned business, we want to help you succeed. And so if that means working in your parking space, parking area, if we can bring resources to the table to help you think through that, to help you design that space, we want to do that. So please do connect with us about that as well.
Great, thank you, Nick. We had another question here just about outreach. So if a business has an idea to do something on their street, what level of sign off do they need from their neighbors? How far out do they need to get sign off for the project for? And then, I guess in relation to that, if you guys do see a lot of applications coming through in an area, what does the process look like to make sure that all of those players are working together and that they're designing a cohesive experience?
Mm-hmm. So sign off, I think I mentioned earlier, there's a notification requirement for businesses that are impacting other adjacent properties. So they're going to notify their neighbors. We're really encouraging folks to get out early and have those conversations with your neighbors, talk about what you want to do, talk about how you can incorporate a plan that involves maybe multiple businesses that are together. I think there's some opportunities for like co-marketing there that are really great. So that's fantastic. We don't have, because this is an emergency response, we're trying to get as many permits and as many businesses operational as possible, as quickly as we can. There's not a veto power in place for that. We're just reviewing each site independently and addressing any kind of constraints that may come up during the notification process and the work with the businesses and the communities. I feel like there was a second half to that question that I just forgot about.
Well, I'm, more just, if you get a lot of permits, say in a specific area, are you gonna, limit the amount of permits issued? Are you gonna, what's the process look like to, maybe get those businesses to work together and do something cohesive?
Yeah, so we do have some locations where there's several businesses that are popping up and have applied early and are trying to get on the ground. And we, as Calvin mentioned earlier, we have some folks that are assigned to different communities or districts, and we're reaching out to the businesses that have applied, and we're saying, hey, let's talk to your neighbors, see what the options are. There's so much demand from several businesses already. Is there an opportunity to look at a Main Street plaza or a couple side street plazas to support everybody, and to provide that space for everyone to have some room to operate and to benefit from the additional foot traffic and customers?
Okay. We do have a little bit of a clarification question here. So you are saying that yes, a business could keep barricades out, overnight, even when they're not operational, to ensure that the space is still going to be closed and that fixtures are still going to be protected. And then I guess in coordination with that, do you have any guidelines for how they, should preserve the space? Thinking about, obviously making sure cars don't go through, but then also, garbage collection, crowd control, things like that.
Nick, you want this one?
So these spaces are sort of managed by the applicant. So that's important. Some of these decisions are in a way up to you. If you want to pull the street furniture in at the end of the night, you can do that. If you want to secure the street furniture sort of to itself to keep it secure, you can do that. Generally, the sites do have certain requirements for access. Even a full plaza, we will generally require has an access lane through the site. So that would be an 11-foot clear space that's not filled with tables or planters. And that would be both for just accessibility reasons to the site, bicycle and pedestrian access to the site, emergency response if needed, access to the site, and could be used potentially for other service providers, goods movement, goods loading, garbage collection, especially things that are happening kind of off hours, can come into the site and access it. But some of this is site by site. There's no one size fits all. Every business district is unique. Every block is unique. And what the level of service that they'll need does need to be worked through with the businesses that are nearby and with the applicant. So it's kind of a not super clear answer because there's not one answer to every one situation.
Thanks, Nick. We had a question about data as well. Do you guys have any metrics that you're looking for to evaluate the success of these programs? And if not, what are some of the things you think businesses should look at as they approach November and they're trying to see, is this successful? Should we, see if we can continue it? What do you kind of see the evaluation process looking like?
So, I was like, are you jumping in there, Nick?
Well, I think you're asking like at the end of this permit period, the end of the summer?
Yeah.
These are summer permits. This is not a commitment to a longer project or a longer permit, but obviously, nobody knows the future. Last week, we thought something that wasn't quite, things are changing on a week by week basis. We're in the middle of kind of an unknown territory. So when November comes, we'll be having those conversations. If people really love what this has done for their businesses and they want to see this continue, then we will absolutely have those conversations. But the assumption here is that this is a summer program that is temporary to kind of help boost business access during the summer months. So yeah, that's kind of to be determined, but these are expected to kind of sunset come November.
Mm-hmm. I will say we are working, I mentioned earlier, like we're rolling this out very quickly, and our normal standards for outreach or getting things in place prior to launch have been delayed in some areas because we are trying to do this in emergency response. We will be releasing a feedback form for folks to fill out and give us information. And then, like Nick mentioned, coming up on November, we're going to want to hear back from businesses at that point about what their experience was like, what they thought worked well, and if it is something they want to see continue into the future, and make sure we're collecting that information and then making decisions at that point.
Great. I think a lot of people, when they first heard about this program, they really saw it, more as something that benefits, bars, restaurants, dining establishments. Can you just clarify and maybe elaborate on how maybe a personal service business might use it, and just other uses beyond the simple, we're going to go outside and have a drink and sit socially distanced?
Mhm. Yeah, so we've actually had several service folks apply for permits or receive permits. There was a barber shop that applied, and they're planning to set up their station outside in their parking space so that they're able to continue to do hair. We've had a couple fitness centers apply, so they're planning to use some right-of-way space to host classes while maintaining that physical distancing space. We've had bookstores and retail shops that want to put some of their merchandise out in the sidewalk or parking or street spaces. So it's really kind of up to the business of what their needs are. And it's not specifically for just dining and bars and restaurants.
Great. We have a couple questions here just about, conflicting interests, things like that, and how issues like that are managed. Is that feedback form where someone should go if they do see something that maybe is negatively impacting their business or wasn't coordinated with the neighbor? How does that interaction process work?
Yeah, I think the feedback form is a great place. I think there's often, especially where a lot of these projects are happening or these larger street projects are happening, there's someone assigned to that district, as we mentioned. And those folks are able to kind of facilitate some of the conversations around that. I will say, it is a challenge. There's, like Nick said, no streetscape is the same, no location is the same. And so we really have to be flexible and adapt and come up with solutions that allow everybody to kind of benefit. So, but yes, that form will be a great place, or reaching out to your district specific representative.
And then do you guys have any guidelines around, how much space a business should possibly take up? So, if my business has a capacity of 40 people, and I'm just wondering, how much of the street do I really need? Do you have any guidelines about how much space they should take up in order to meet that capacity they have, but then also be socially distant and safe?
So I don't think that it's kind of interesting. So recently we had a sushi bar that reached out to us, and they have a very, very small interior space that is basically just bar seating. So being able to use sidewalk seating and parking seating and maybe working with their neighbors to do a street closure is going to give them more capacity than they would have had initially. So that can be the case in some situations, depending on the location and depending on what businesses are doing and how folks are working together and how they want to use the space that they're asking for. So I think that just varies depending on request by request.
Okay. We also just have some questions about, cost, talking with other neighborhood stakeholders. Can you maybe talk about kind of the who's who of who a business should talk to if they're interested in this program? What level of community stakeholders do they really need to engage with? And then how might you have those community stakeholders work with these businesses in order to make sure that they can operate successfully and that they have a space that is, welcome and is good use for all?
I think it's worth just sort of imagining your district in terms of level of complexity. I mean, we all know that the main street itself is a more complex space. The truth is most of our main streets, or kind of traditional main streets, are probably not great candidates for a full street plaza. Just the complexity involved is going to be challenging. But going around the corner, a side street, it has fewer businesses that are directly affected, fewer coordination needs with other agencies and bureaus. So there's sort of a sliding scale of a simple parking lane to a side street that has fewer activities to a more dense district area or even a main street. So generally, the more complex it is, the longer it's going to take, the more people will need to be involved. We're talking here to sort of Venture Portland and business representatives. We see a huge role for you all in terms of being connectors and coordinators of your neighborhood districts. PBOT's not in a position to directly negotiate with every single business on these corridors, and it definitely helps if there's kind of an organizing force behind it. So if you're hearing a lot of interest as representatives of your neighborhoods, if you're hearing a lot of interest from businesses in participating in this program, and if people want to go big with their vision of what this could be, then there is going to be a round of community conversations that need to happen. And we can definitely connect you with design resources to help have some of those conversations. And it could be that what you need to do is work through a design workshop to see what might be possible, to air some of those concerns and address those concerns as a part of the design from day one. So just think about that. Think about what your role can be to be a connector and a convener. Because yeah, these are contested space, and we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to be a part of that design process to create these spaces. So there's definitely a role. This is, again, community-led permit program. We're only here because businesses are asking us to be here. So if you want to do something big and bold, come ask us to do something big and bold with you. If you want to move quickly, scale back and do something small, and we can continue those conversations. I suspect that as some of these roll out, as there's examples on the street and you get to see what that might look like and what that might feel like, whether that's near your main street or on a different main street, then you can come back to your community and say, hey, look at what they're doing up in St. John's. That's pretty cool. I want to do something like that here. We recognize that this is going to be kind of an ongoing process for the next few weeks as people think about this and see this and start to really think about what reopening means for them.
Thank you, Nick. We had a question regarding, I guess how far out a business could, apply for a space. So I'm imagining if I'm a business on a busy main street and, I don't want to shut down the main street, I think maybe the parking spot's not going to be a very pleasant customer experience, but, there's a side street maybe a block or two away from me that I think would be a great place to do business. That would be a lot more comfortable. Can that business go ahead and apply for something like that?
Yes, so you can apply for spaces that are not directly adjacent to your property. Again, that's going to be a flag for us, like, hey, are you working with your neighbors? We're going to encourage you to reach out to have early conversations about, where are folks at with it? Do they want to be incorporated in the project? So looking at that space, I would say from the permit requests that we've had so far, that's very rare that happens. Most businesses want their retail or their services to be close so they can keep an eye on them and they can easily handle transactions that are happening. So that's the majority of what we're seeing.
Great, thank you. We also did have a question just about, kind of clarifying how we don't want this to be an events permit where it's, a free-for-all for everyone. Come on out all in one day. What if my business is only open 2 to 3 times a week? Are you going to work with that business to make sure they can still do their commerce, even though it's not, 7 days a week, 9 hours a day?
Yeah, I think that falls into the same kind of fitness use of this space. So like the gyms that are using it, they're not going to be out there 24/7 or, 8 to 10 or whatever their hours, normal restaurant hours would be, but they may be out there hosting classes 2 times a day or 3 times a week. And that fits within their normal business model. So we would look at that and work with those types of projects. Like I mentioned before, we just want to avoid creating events where you're having a big draw to something that is very infrequent or that's like a big flashy kind of more community event style thing. And those will be evaluated on a case-by-case basis. So please send in a request form. We'll talk with you, we'll review it and let you know if we have concerns.
I just want to remind everyone too that we only have a little more than 5 minutes left in the meeting. So if you have any questions, I'd encourage you to get them in the chat. I can't guarantee that we'll get to them in this remaining 5 minutes, but we'll work to address them following the meeting. One of the questions that has been coming up too is, what if I'm a bar that normally has live music? I don't want to do live music outside quite yet. So I apply for a permit to do, bar and restaurant seating outdoors. A month goes by, it's successful. I want to start doing live music out there. Do I need to let you guys know that I'm going to be using it for live music now? Or do I just need to go through the normal, noise permit process in order to make that happen?
Yes. So it kind of depends on your scenario. If you're planning to add any components into the space. So if you're adding a stage, if you're bringing out a bunch of sound equipment that's going to be placed in the space, and it's a larger closure, then we're going to want to see that and review your site plan, update the site plan that we have on file to make sure that those components are shown in there in case emergency response or anyone has to come through. We share those with them, so we just want them to be aware of any objects that might be in the right of way. But you absolutely can do it. You would need a noise variance, and there's links for that on our website as well. But we will work with you and make sure that any of that can happen. Yes, things are flexible. We realize people are going to change. Maybe you want your parking and it's going great and you want to expand that and have a little bit more space or another parking space. You can definitely contact us and we can work with you to kind of change your permit or issue a new permit that includes the additional space. Or maybe you want to scale back. Maybe you started big and you're like, oh, I'm not using a third of this. Maybe I want to open it up for another business to use or give back the parking or whatever that looks like. We can absolutely work with you on that.
And then, speaking specifically, as this dovetails again with sidewalk usage, are you guys open to the idea of maybe using a parking space for pedestrian traffic? We had a specific business, ask about this because they want to make sure that as customers are coming in and out of their business, that they don't need to worry about, running closer than 6 feet up to someone who's just walking by on the sidewalk. So I see this as a way to maybe, increase access to that business's door without necessarily putting them right next to someone who's just walking by. Is that something you guys are open to?
I would say, yeah, absolutely. We want to make sure that your customers feel safe and comfortable, and we want you to think creatively about what that means for your customers. If you're a mini mart or a grocery store and you've got a line of customers out the door, think about whether that is the type of thing that can be happening in the street so that the sidewalk is kept clear and safe for other people who are in the district. So definitely broaden your imagination of how that space can be used to try to make sure that people feel safe and comfortable and to address anxiety they might be feeling after emerging from stay-at-home order.
Yeah, I think one of the important things to consider with those kinds of solutions as well is ADA access. So maybe you're queuing your customers in the street, but we still want to make sure that we have room and space for people of all abilities to queue up and have access to your services.
That's a great point to keep in mind with all these projects that, as we design them, we need to keep in mind, how people of all abilities will be able to access them and actually make use of, this public space. One more question too. What if I want to put semi-permanent furniture out in one of these parking spaces? So less maybe the small table I have inside and more like a parklet style deck, or even like some sort of concrete table that I envision staying out there all the way through November 1st.
Yeah, absolutely. Once the space is permitted, you can leave your things out there all the time. And you can put whatever furniture is agreed upon in your site plan into your space and leave it there and have access to it 24/7. So that is very, very possible. I know that already we have some folks that are planning to place some concrete tables that are heavier and they're just going to stay in the space through November. So that's pretty realistic. I know a lot of business owners don't want to be towing things in and out every night. Maybe you do for security reasons, or you want to lock them up, as Calvin had mentioned. But it's just kind of up to the business owner and what they'd like to see in the space. There's also folks that are looking at adding planters and having some foliage around and some greenery, or maybe other components that are going to beautify or create a sense of ambiance in their space.
Great, thank you, Bridget. We do have a couple other questions here, but I'm just going to make sure that we address that in our follow-up because we are coming up on 1 p.m. I want to thank you both, Bridget and Nick, for taking the time out to talk to all of these small businesses in Portland. I think this is a really great discussion for people to have and to get them thinking creatively about how they can work with their neighbors to really make the community a space where businesses can still operate in this COVID environment. Then also customers can actually access those businesses in a safe and socially distant way. So thank you again. And I mentioned this at the top of the meeting, but I will be sharing out a lot of the resources that were put in the chat for this meeting, as well as a few more. So I would heavily encourage you guys to look through those as you're thinking about these projects, and even open up the application too to see what kind of questions they're looking for and what kind of information you're going to need in order to make these things happen.
Oh, there's a bunch of information on the website. I dropped the link in here. So we're adding to that daily. This is very fluid. It's adapting and flexing and being developed while we're issuing permits. So things are changing. You can find recent updates there, and always reach out and contact us if you have additional questions.
Definitely. And, you know, as was mentioned earlier in this meeting too, if you have a question about how your business association might dovetail into this, I recommend reaching out to them, or even just if you're interested about how to work with, you know, your community as a whole. You can talk to me, you can talk to PBOT. We're here for you to help answer these questions and work through what is a really uncertain and brand new environment for everyone. So thank you again all. Keep an eye on your email for a recording of this meeting, as well as other resources mentioned. And we hope to see business success over the summer here. So thank you.